Hello and welcome to Learning Outcomes Leaders, brought to you by Genio. I'm James.
And I'm Scott, and on this podcast, you'll hear us chatting to higher education professionals who can talk the talk about how they've been there and done it.
We'll discuss some of their proudest and most ambitious projects and explore the most effective ways in which they've helped to improve and elevate their students' experience. This episode is slightly different as it sees us wrap up our very first season of Learning Outcomes Leaders. We hope you've enjoyed the podcast so far and have been able to take inspiration, insights, and ideas from your peers into your own higher education environment. So at the end of season 1, we've put together a highlight reel of the conversations we've had so far, drawing on a range of expertise across the institutional experience. We'll be back later this year for season 2, so make sure to keep your eyes peeled and ears to the ground for that. But for now, let's get into the episode.
The reason for this podcast is to share information. It's for other people to know how they could do something like this. Throughout our conversation today, it's felt like it's been a lot of a mindset shift, I think, or just a certain mindset. What would you say to someone who's looking to do something similar? How would they go about doing this? Where would their head be? What would they need to do?
I think you just have to really think students first. And and this is a cliche, but one of the things is you have to teach and work with the students you have, even if you want a different kind of students. And I think at an institution like USAO or at an institution like Buena Vista or an institution like Southern Vermont, you have to be genuinely proud of what you're doing. And this goes to the whole, and sorry, this is another hobby horse of mine, but this goes to the whole economy of higher education, right? The whole thing is really about prestige. And I remember early in my career being sort of depressed about that whole thing. But the better way to go about it and the better way to, as a professional, develop a, sense of career satisfaction is to figure out what it is that you're really trying to do and then take pride in doing that well. So if you're not a professor at Harvard, well, there aren't a lot of professors at Harvard, be glad that you're doing this other thing. And that's where my own personal journey has been is, changing that mindset. And, my wife has a little bit beamed that into me, frankly, which is good. She's like, stop being such a snob. But I think that's really important. And I think the question is, and this has been in my role as a leader every place, what is going to do the best thing for the students that we have and how are they going to be helped? And it's whether it's academic things or whether it's stuff like the pandemic and identifying the problems that our population was going to have and figuring out a strategy to address those. I think that's really what you need to do. And if you're at a teaching institution, which we are, there's kind of no excuse for not doing it that way. And so that's my first question always is, what's going to work for the students? And this is not about coddling them. This is not about giving them things they don't deserve. It's none of the things that people say are bad about this approach. It's just about, thinking, who are our students and what's going to do good for them. And then doing the best you can to do that.
It'd be really great to just sort of hear if you've got one piece of advice, let's say one piece of advice for anybody listening today that is looking to roll out something similar. How do they get started? What's that sort of key thing that you would say to them?
Oh, just one. Like I'm some kind of fount of knowledge, right? I think two things spring to mind, but I think they're connected. One is, start to ask a really simple question that your leadership may ask you at some point. right? Our simple question was, how many coaching sessions did we have last semester? We can pull the data that shows us how many appointment summaries were submitted by people that we call success coaches, but that is not the definition of a coaching session, right? Some of those might have been emails, some of those might have been phone calls that never went through. Like, there were so many different ways people would be submitting this form that was counting towards what we would have previously, so figure out a really simple data point that you would, or figure out a really simple question that you want to answer, and then go see if you can answer that question using the data you currently have at your disposal. And then the second thing is when almost inevitably you can't, get your data people wherever they sit in your organization and bring them on the journey with you from the start, because none of this happens without our data analysts being able to collect clean, consistent data out of 2 or 3 disparate CRMs, bring them together somehow in their magical data land, and then regurgitate them, render them back to us in a dashboard, in a Power BI dashboard, right? If those folks don't really understand the strategy behind why we're collecting this data, don't really understand what we're trying to render the data into so that people can use it, if you have to go explain that to your data analysts week after week and they're not just in those conversations hearing it, it's a lot more difficult of a process, and you're going to result with things that data people want to see and not things that leadership and staff of people who are dealing with students want to see. Not that the things that people want to see are bad. They're normally incredible. They're normally just somewhat not as readily usable as some of the other stuff. So that's what I would say is, start with a really simple question that you want answered and see if your data can answer it. If it can't answer it, or if you think it can answer it, but a data person comes in and says, no, actually, that's not what this means, then keep those people around and insert them into that kind of vertical structure of empowerment and move forward, just trying to answer that question and see where you get.
What are your hopes and dreams of the impact of this research on higher education?
Hopes and dreams of the impact of this type of research is that people can be thoughtful in what is most effective for student success. So I mentioned several analyses that had very positive impacts. There were others that didn't seem to move the needle much. And as we are moving into this new AI era, higher education is going to change immensely. And it doesn't mean that the research that's been done is less valuable. It's actually more valuable because you're able to look at that thread from this is what we're doing as a university. Is it having an impact on where we want our students to go? And with the workforce changing, with the future of work being so unstable, with higher education having had such a static infrastructure for the past century or more, we are going to need to be more adaptive than ever. And to be more adaptive than ever, that means you need to be able to really understand how your inputs, what we're doing as universities, are impacting students and their outcomes. And a lot of what is being done traditionally is going to need to be questioned and it's going to need to be tweaked. And so having an eye towards evaluation, towards measurement can be really important, especially in these times of transition. So this is what I'm hoping to see. I know that Utah State is already engaged in these conversations of what experience are students going to need.
So what would you say to someone who wants to do something like HyFlex at their institution? What would you say? What advice would you give them going forward?
Thank you. That's a great question. So there's a couple of pieces of advice I think about there. The first is I would look for long-term wins. So things take a while in academia. And the way that you're successful is building up trust from little actions. So again, to provide an analogy here, if I'm working with faculty and ultimately I know that there's a big problem that we're working towards, I look for little problems along the way. It's like a computer game. Before you battle the big boss at the end, you battle the little bosses. So you're looking for ways that you can make life easier for faculty, that you can sort of demonstrate, here's something that I'm on your side for. So ultimately, when you come to the bigger thing, you've got a track record. And you're looking always for the students. So there are, faculty sometimes realize that they're asked to do more each year with fewer resources. Put in some more hours, do this. So if you are looking to make a change, look for things that you can remove. Look for things that you can take away. So someone has the ability to carry this new burden or to shift to a new thing. And then the last part is communication. So that has to be rapid, continual communication all the way, which is two-part. You're not just saying things, you're listening to feedback. So if I'm really involved in a project, maybe 50% of my time is just spent on communication. Zoom meetings, meeting people in their office, sending out emails, being able to chat on the telephone, being available. So, it's not a thing that you do, at the snap of a finger. It's not something that you decide today that this is the thing that I'm going to do. You take some time thinking about it. You create some space in your routine to be able to do that. And you realize that this is something that's going to take some time.
I think that brings it back to like change management, right? It's all about change management, right? Building that trust so that when you do eventually propose this idea, which is going to be very difficult, they trust that you're the person to manage that situation and support them along through it. So to round this out, what would you say to someone else who's really interested in bringing AI into their institution, perhaps building a course or just opening like faculty's eyes or the institute's eyes to how they use AI? How would you encourage somebody and advise somebody to do that who wants to?
So first I would say, if you're opposed to AI, accept in your heart it's not going away. It's I'm sorry, it's not even a hill to die on. Like, it's gone. The hill has been raised. It is flattened. It's not there. And know too that, even if you don't want to use AI, your choices should not be informed. Your personal ethical choices should not be informing and limiting access to information of students. Like, that's your opinion. You're not a gatekeeper. You need to provide that information. I would say the next thing is making sure students understand the ethics of it so that they can make informed choices. Like, don't skip the ethics option. There was a lot of discussion when we started our class about, do we really need to discuss the ethics because it's discussed so much in media anyways? Yes, you need to discuss it because you can't assume everyone reads those same articles. And then I think the next thing would be looking at what are the most likely uses for students in your area to use AI. So, like, we have a professional technical program. We know exactly where those students are going. We talk to those employers. What would you expect to have people do day one? What should they be able to learn within 30 days? What should they be able to learn within the first 3 months? Right. And then making sure that your AI class, make sure that they're set, that students are prepared for that first day, but also have the kind of logical or structural understanding to learn the rest of those 60-day, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day options. I would also say that you do not need to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of AI classes out there. Find them and steal the best parts of them. Just cannibalize them. I mean, really, like, there is no reason to develop from the ground up an AI class anymore. In the same way that if you were building a textbook on chemistry, you would look at other chemistry textbooks. You wouldn't just go, well, I must author from the very first sentence an original chemistry understanding of chemistry. Do those kinds and reach out to other your colleagues at other schools and say, like, what works? That's the other thing is instruction is inherently iterative. A class will change from quarter to quarter, year to year, as faculty figure out what students respond to, what they don't respond to, even just on the level of like, I have this great assignment, but it's a giant PITA to grade, so I'm not going to keep assigning it. Talk to the faculty about what they're doing who already have this, and then be open to constantly changing, especially for this class, because this class is good. I don't know what AI is gonna look like in a year. I don't know what it's gonna look like in 6 weeks. So just be open to that.
I like that as a key takeaway. I think AI being the new transferable skill. We've had team building, we've had being able to work by ourselves, working with PowerPoint. That used to be the skill when I was leaving high school. That's what you had to learn. AI is that new one, and so we can prep students for that workplace. What would your sort of key message to higher education professionals be that are wrestling with this ever-changing sort of student dynamic and their own sort of KPIs and things as an institution? How do you marry that up?
I think this has to happen on two levels. One, it has to happen with that metric of student success and satisfaction. So the KPI is more appropriate to the outcome you're looking for. So be careful about how you're defining success just as much as how they do it. Um, because as you well know, if your your path will be determined by where you want to go. So thinking about success in a way that's textured, and then setting some priorities, right? So because resources are not infinite, and tuition, which is already exorbitant, cannot keep growing in this sort of self-destructive pursuit of student support services in order to be successful, right? So this is starting to create a kind of unsustainable financial model for higher ed when it was already struggling with that, right? So sure, you can triple the number of counselors you have, but now you've tripled your budget. Um, and now you have to pay for that. And who's going to pay for that? So there's a lot of tension there. The good thing, of course, is that higher ed is filled with really smart people. They just have to know that it's not enough to advocate for student success. You have to do it in a way that's sustainable. So that's a complicated conversation. The second level is about the future of higher ed itself. And this is where college presidents and politicians and other people who have a stake in the big picture really need to be a lot more flexible and innovative. Um, I think that just shoring up the 4-year model, throwing more resources at it, as I just said, is not going to work forever. Uh, and so they're going to need to start thinking about the model itself. For example, in a 4-year program, do you really need a major to occupy, say, 2/3 of your requirements? International studies, instead of taking up all of that time, let's say it took up half of what it does now, and the other half was spent on building skills that were much more practical and applicable in the market, where we married the concept of internship, which is very common, with an apprenticeship, which is more immediately practical. Why do we have one set of colleges that do practical apprenticeship like things and another that do purely intellectual things? These are two good ideas. They could be married to each other in one program, but we're not really thinking that imaginatively. Um, so I think higher ed has a lot of work in front of it, and because of demographic changes, technological changes, AI, et cetera, financial challenge is no one wants to spend $100,000 a year on a college education. It's just staggering. We're about to head off a cliff here, and I think that this requires a lot more imaginative thinking to avoid the plunge.
If we could boil it down to sort of, I'm going to say one tip or piece of advice that you've got for other people working in higher education when it comes to moving through this next barrier, this next sort of change in technology, what would that be?
Kind of a combo tip. So the first part of it is this may be the first major disruption you've experienced in education, but it will not be the last. So keeping that perspective will help you remain a little bit calmer. This won't be the last one, especially in the States right now. Education is very much in a state of flux. The second thing is for higher education, connect with industry partners, connect with people outside the campus, and find out how our artists, musicians, engineers, nurses, athletic trainers, electricians, construction managers, how are people in the industries of your discipline using technology now? What changes are they seeing? What do they expect from graduates? And then bring that back and align your learning to where your students are going. That is our job in higher ed. We are the last stop before career. Even if the career is pursuing a doctorate degree somewhere and going into education yourself. How are these technologies being used and prepare our students? I feel like I failed at my job. I failed my students if they get to a job interview and they're asked to do a task for that interview that involves AI, and they're like, I wasn't allowed to use it in college, so yeah. Our students are on a trajectory. When we introduced Common Core, one of the videos I would show teachers was a girl sitting in for an interview. She was like fresh out of college or high school, and she just like this interview, and the interviewer was asking her a question, and her only response was, "I choose C. I choose C," because in most multiple choice tests, C is the right answer. And so she was prepared for a multiple choice response. She didn't know the answer, so she took her best guess. Like, to me, that's kind of like, if we don't connect everyday experiences, everyday communication, collaboration, critical thinking, with the student's experience, technological, non-technological, they're not going to be fully prepared for those experiences in life and career after graduation.
You've been through a huge project here over years to get to a point where we've got this massive data that we can use, both qualitative, quantitative. It's coming into the hands now. We're getting to that going over the hill sort of moment. There's going to be people listening to this that are going to have two reactions. One is going to be, this is incredible. I can't wait to get started. This is super inspiring. The other side is going to be, this is super inspiring. I can't wait to get excited. Oh, this seems really daunting.
Sure.
What's your advice to those people that are about to start this journey and go, where do I start? How do I get to that point?
Pick something. And that seems really silly to say, but I will tell you the first analysis I ran, which was 15 years ago or more, was looking at our Hispanic students who either participated in community-based research, or community engaged learning, or didn't. And that was it. And it looked at like, is this protective or not? And that was it. And I was able to, and the reason I did that, so this is maybe like part 2 of it, pick something with a stakeholder that is engaged. So I was able to pick that and in kind of with the stakeholder, show that information. And then like she presented it all over the place at all sorts of conferences and stuff like that. And so I was able to build the momentum from these small things because I paired a pretty basic analysis with the right stakeholder. And then from there, other stakeholders are like, well, I want that and I want that. And eventually it becomes, well, I can't do that until I get more resources. So there's a backlog now, right? And so it's like this grassroots thing. I think if you are that person that's like, I don't know how to do, right? I don't know how to do this, or like, I don't know how to start it. I think that's what I would say. It doesn't have to be like a campus wide enterprise changing thing. It can be one thing or 2 things, or like, some well-placed marketing about it or something like that. So it's getting the right stakeholders together that see the value in it and then doing your best to show them that value. So, and that's that part of like translating it. I couldn't say, hey, person X, like this, I found this, and here's the statistics behind it. This was statistically significant, blah, blah, blah. I had to say, it looks like you're going to get a 12% increase in retention if you encourage people to do this, or something like that, right? So it had to be that like sound bite at that point. And that is what I would say to people that don't know where to start or don't know how to get this done. Like if you have the interest and you have the knowledge, or somebody that has the knowledge to run the stats, then just start where you can and start small and then like tell the heck out of that story, right? Like that's the key. Don't just run it. You got to tell the heck out of it. You got to really be able to translate that to what I would say like a naive stakeholder. That's what I would say. Like somebody who isn't doing these data things all day long.
What would you say to anybody who was trying to make the switch and trying to move into higher education for the first time? What advice would you give them?
Persistence. Don't give up. I've had a lot of people where I sing the praises of higher education. I really do, because I just think in general, it's a great career to be a part of, and the satisfaction of helping people, like you see it on the daily. And I don't have a super student facing job, but in all my community work, I get to see those students and how our initiatives and our conversations actually become successful and become better for the students, right? But I've had people and friends, I'm like, oh, you should apply for this and blah, blah. And they're like, oh, I didn't even get an interview. And they're like, so I'm not going to ever do it again. I'm like, no, that is, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's common in Rose, but I can tell you right now in California, that is common. That is common. It took me 10 years. You cannot use this one rejection to say, I'll never want to do it again. One, that just persistence of if it's something you really want to do, please continue, because it's not personal. A lot of times there's a lot of things in the background we don't know why and what they're looking for. So don't take that as a personal thing of why you might have gotten rejected the first time. And guess what? All the positions I applied to before, were a lot less money, a lot more of the kind of a beginning phase of a career. And this was a little more advanced, and I took a chance, and there you go, I got it. So I got the one that I was like, oh, this is kind of out of all of them, probably the better one at this point. The other thing is that if I do personally feel that it is not just a job. We are literally, that's the hard part. I think I would recommend that if you're just looking to go to work and leave and to not really insert yourself in the company, wherever it may be, and that's fine. That is I'm not saying that's wrong in any way. But I think in higher education, that's really hard to do and actually do your job right, because this is about student success. This is about students graduating and preparing them for a career, preparing them for the real world, right? Especially in community colleges, where it's kind of that transition of high school still mentality into, at one point, transferring to a university or a Cal State or whatever it may be. But it is, what is the word? It's people work. It's very much even a step beyond customer service, because that one interaction is not going to end just because they leave it's going to be continuous over and over again. And one bad experience could literally have them dropping out. We have heard stories like, I was in missions of records and they were just kind of rude, and I wasn't sure. And I'm not saying our people, I'm saying stories I've heard. And I just felt like I just didn't know what to do. And I gave up. I just stopped trying. You know what I mean? The application process was complicated. I couldn't find anybody to help me. And it might be that, or a counselor told me this, it was the wrong information. And now I have another whole year of extra time I have to go because of bad advice. And I just feel like I need to give up. And then life happens, right? There's all different reasons. But those few bad experiences can mean literally succeeding or not for students. So this is very much a more involved thing. I think that every time I go to work, I know that it's not just a job for me, it's literally changing people's lives. And so if you want to work in higher education, please take that into perspective, because it's going to be very hard for you to remove that emotional, personal side of it, because it really is part of it. Because I mean, education's scary and it's hard. It's, I mean, even for me, you know what I mean? Like I don't know why I keep doing it to myself, but I keep going back to school for things. And I'm like, I hate this. And then I leave it. I'm like, I really love that. I should do it again. You know what I mean? But when I have those bad experiences, it's really demoralizing and it's really hard to pick myself back up. So my big thing is, please know that I would hope that if you get into higher education, that it's really more than a job, especially for students, that it can affect the rest of their lives.
The purpose of the podcast is so that we can help educate others, give other people ideas about what they can do to help better themselves or better their students and improve student success. So if you were talking to someone who is just about to jump into the same position as yourself, or just moving into working within the accessibility space within higher ed, what are some of the things you would say to them to help them perhaps professionally and to improve their experience in order to be able to better serve?
That's a fantastic question. And I feel like I have so much stuff that I'd love to be like, blah, 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 blah. I think that the most important thing is that you will have a lot of people talk to you about being like, your empathy is a weakness in this position because of how much we do with the law and how much we have to tell people no, right? Kind of like I mentioned before, is that like, it is my job to, if someone's asking for something that isn't reasonable, I have to be the, quote unquote bad guy and say, sorry, can't do that. Your empathy is a strength, and it is a strength that is your when I say no, I don't ever look at a student and go, really? Like, you're really asking me for that? Be so for real. Because I have that empathy that I cling to like a life vest. I hear that what I'm hearing when you tell me that you feel like you need your test modified. What I am hearing when you say that is that you have not been given the skills or the resources to feel like you can show your knowledge to what you know that you can do, right? You as a student, when you come to me and you say, I need my test modified, one of the first questions I ask after that is like, how do you feel about the content? 90% of time, students will say, well, I know the information, but I am bad at test taking. I struggle with time. I need help reading it, whatever, right? And so then I lean into that empathy and I say things like, wow, so it doesn't sound like you would need a content support at all, right? Because that's how I say no without being an ass. And I can look at them and say, so you're fully able to do the work. And they go, well, yeah, of course. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. I can hear that from what you're telling me. It sounds like to me what you need is the ability to have your test read out loud. You don't need a modified, you need it read out loud. And I'm sorry that support hasn't been offered to you before. It sounds like that maybe would have been really helpful to you previously. It sounds like you just need some extra time on your tests. It sounds like you've never been taught testing strategies before, which I was never taught testing strategies when I was in high school. I had to seek that out in college. And so here's how you can do that here. Get those testing strategies. Now that you have your test right out loud and someone actually sits you down and teaches you how to take a test, right? Really good place. And if not, please know that you can always reach back out to me. It is so easy to get jaded and to lose that empathy after years of people going, wow, Avery sucks because she said no. And but I would say that having, we talk about like having, sorry, I'm kind of getting all over the place, but practicing radical empathy is how you make the space like a space you want to be in. And as a disabled person, the space I want to be in is where I am told by the people who have power over me, like that I am capable, especially when I'm asking for things that maybe I don't need because it's coming from a place of anxiety, right? Or when faculty come in and they say, Avery, what in the hell is this? Like, I have this accommodation plan, huh? And they are coming at me not in a space, I mean, it feels like they're coming at me from a space of, Avery, you're dumb, right? But it's coming from a space of, you're giving me this information. I don't know what to do with it. I care about my students. I care about my subject. I don't want my students to not get the information. I don't want my subject to be, mutilated into little pieces that don't make sense. This matters to me. And the minute that, and this happens to me a lot, so please understand that I am not preaching from a place of perfection, where I will get, you can ask my people in my office, I'll definitely be like, man, this person came in and that was really hard for me, the way that they said that, and it really made me feel defensive. But when I take a minute and I approach that with empathy and with curiosity of, tell me more about that. Like, walk me through that. Or what I'm hearing right now is you're really frustrated, right? And I don't want that. Like, I don't want you to be frustrated. Can we figure out a way to do this? Is it 100% perfect every time? No. But if I was talking to someone who was brand new in my field, whole life preserver, because it will change how people perceive you and it will make you feel so much better at the end of the day.
It's an interesting balance to strike, isn't it? 'Cause I think as a human race over time, everything that we ever innovate is to make life easier for ourselves and more comfortable, whether that be windows on a house or a car instead of a horse. Like these things have increasingly over time been, how is we going to make life easier? Learning's almost the one that we still have to actively make a little bit difficult. And not impossible, but it still has to be a process. It can't be like a checkout at a supermarket. And I think where AI's come in and being able to go for a lot of tasks, we'll do it for you. Don't worry about that. Here it is. That in a way can be counterproductive if not used in the right way. When you're looking at AI then into the future, obviously I know you touched on things like quizzes and things. What do you potentially see the future of that looking like when it comes to learning platforms in the future? How might that look?
Yeah, I think the problem is at the moment the conversation is very focused around generative AI and it generating content and media. And I know one of the big concerns in institutions is around how this sort of plagiarism and how it's really hard to detect some of this stuff. But I think if you and that's a whole other podcast episode that we could easily go into, right? So skirting around that, I think the challenge that you've got is how you really harness AI in products that isn't through that traditional chat interface or Gen AI interface. I think AI is going to be incredible at personalization, and we've talked a lot in this sort of episode about how you create that environment, that sort of unique, like almost special environment for someone to learn in a way that really is tailored to them. And I think AI is going to be incredible at that, in terms of it understanding who you are and what resonates with you and how you learn almost, what's the format and styles of which you're really like consuming content really works for you. And I think this is an area that is still quite unexplored. I think people are still focusing quite heavily on the sort of Gen AI chat interfaces where actually there's so much more powerful implementations for AI. So yeah, I think we're starting to sort of figure that out. I think we're figuring out, beyond just generating summaries in text, like where it can show up in products in a way that is nice and not just forced in. I think the problem is everyone feels like they have to force AI into their product, but actually it's like, what problems are you trying to solve? How can you use this technology to reduce or remove friction where it's not needed, like where it's getting in the way of someone learning, versus where can you sort of get out of the way and allow that person to go through a bit of a struggle, to go through a bit of friction, to ensure that knowledge really embeds in them. And I think the personalization stuff is just super interesting. We need to think about privacy aware ways in which we do this, and we need to be super careful about consent and ensuring that everything, around it, often you're dealing with people who might be vulnerable or might be, particularly at risk, and you want to make sure that you sort of respect the responsibility of what you're building for there. But yeah, imagine if you had a system that really understood, your dyslexia in more detail, or how you work in a way that supports, you can work with your ADHD. I think there's huge potential for this technology that is currently untapped.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us on Learning Outcome Leaders. We hope you found the conversation valuable and that it gave you some ideas for how you can elevate your own student experience.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Until next time, have an amazing day.